Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Could you explain to us the article under which Mr. Guaido declared himself president? It is said that it has expired last month. Could you explain that to us?
As to the Venezuelan constitution, the National Assembly has passed a resolution that states that that 30-day period of interim presidency will not start ending or counting until the day Nicolas Maduro leaves power. So the 30 days doesn't start now. It starts after Maduro. And that's a resolution of the National Assembly.
Saying, you know, I was elected for 4 years to be president, and then 2 years in, you changed the rules so that your term didn't start, hasn't even started yet.
Well, you don't get a vote because you're not in the National Assembly. But we...
You're not the National Assembly either.
Does the U.S. view that as constitutional under their system?
Yes. I mean, we're taking the National Assembly is the only legitimate democratic institution left in Venezuela. And their interpretation of the Constitution, as you know, is that as of the date of this alleged term for Maduro, the presidency is vacant. But they have also said that that 30-day period starts when Maduro goes.
So Guaido is the interim president of an interim that doesn't exist yet.
The 30-day end to his interim presidency starts counting because he's not in power. That's the problem. Maduro is still there. So they have decided that they will count that from when he actually is in power and Maduro is gone. I think it's logical.
So then he really isn't interim president.
He is interim president, but he's not
No power.
able to exercise the powers of the office because Maduro still is there.
March 20th, 2019. Thank you for joining me yet again. And boy, that is tough to watch. To see somebody like that utterly struggle to present something that they tell everyone is just so absolutely certain. Truly, the Guaido psyop, which we'll touch on. But I'll be going over today how the UN has urged Israel to stop killing innocent people. Please, Israel, can you stop breaking the laws that we make everyone else adhere to? Can you please stop killing all these innocent people? They've urged them. So nice to see the United Nations, doing its job, pretending to fight for things that need to change. This is the toothless tiger that is the United Nations. Still good to see that they're saying it. People will talk about it, showing you that they are killing innocent people. But I'd sure like to see them do a little bit more than urge. I'll be talking about how the U.S. is killing untold amounts of civilians in Somalia. There's an Amnesty report that comes out today, that came out today, that we interestingly just talked about Somalia, so we'll be covering that as well as the U.S. killing civilians basically everywhere else in the world. And to begin, of course, the Guaido psyop, as I called it, and how the U.S. seized its own Venezuelan embassies in an act of what I would call panicked desperation in a way to try to sell this narrative that is clearly failing. For the first article, coming from Medium.com, from Caitlin Johnstone, always doing an excellent job, entitled America's Venezuelan Strategy, Coup by Sheer Narrative Control. Very important thing to understand. She's always talking about narrative versus actions, how we have to pay attention to what they do, not what they say, because they are regularly lying to us. And of course, this is where I get in getting the clip that I showed you to begin with, the embarrassing clip, where he really can't, basically, he's the president of nothing, and they're even laughing at him as he's trying to explain this. This is an important concept of how this is all going, and one thing I disagree with her on is that I do feel that if this continues to fail, like this clearly is failing, that I think they would not shy away from military action, as she feels otherwise. But right now, this is all they're trying to do is force this into place by continuing to lie, apparently. Now, the Trump administration is working, as you know, as we've been covering, to overthrow the government of Venezuela. That is abundantly clear, as we've proven from the beginning. And remember, in the beginning, they pretended like they were just a casual observer who stepped up to help somebody who is rising up to fight for democracy. And then we find out the truth as it goes on, that they had phone calls about this months prior, that they had a meeting in the White House about how to do this. They gave Guaido the information about what article in the Constitution to use. I mean, they've been involved from day one. And even prior to that, training Guaido, and on and on and on. We can go over all the backstory. But they're clearly now, we know, trying to overthrow the government. This is a fact. And they are not doing this by way of military invasion, not yet anyway, nor by funneling thousands of armed militants into the country, as we've seen in countless other places, nor even by starvation, sanctions, and CIA operations alone. The first and foremost means of overthrowing Venezuela's government currently being utilized by the United States government is, as she puts it, the low-risk, low-cost plan to simply control the stories that everyone tells themselves about who is actually in charge in Venezuela. As she points out, humans are natural, storytelling animals. Everything hinges around the narrative, and that is incredibly important, and this is why they are focusing on it so heavily. Now, everything the Trump administration does to Venezuela is done with the goal of controlling the stories people tell about it. They smash the country with starvation sanctions, then tell everyone to believe that Maduro is starving his own people. They stage a humanitarian aid stunt, air quotes there in case you couldn't hear the inflection in my voice, on Venezuela's border. Then they lie and tell everyone that Maduro is blocking all the aid to Venezuela and setting trucks on fire because he wants to starve the hungry and kill sick people, apparently, even though it's all incredibly, verifiably false. It's all about controlling the narrative with the goal of changing who is recognized as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Not who is actually, but who is recognized as such. Now, we saw this illustrated especially clearly with the press briefing with the State Department's, special representative for Venezuela, the war criminal Elliot Abrams that you saw in the beginning of the show. And by the way, in case you have not caught that part of my previous shows, he is a convicted war criminal that was pardoned by Bush Sr. Pardoned after lying to Congress multiple times and shipping weapons to rebels and on and on and on. Convicted war criminal, now doing the same. By the way, also involved in the previous attempt to overthrow Chavez. Thank you for the super chat. Now, since the Trump administration's coup by narrative has not gone as planned, Abrams stumbled all over himself in, informing the press that the goalposts of the story have now been moved to adjust to where they're currently at in their failing effort. As Caitlin puts it, so to recap, Guaido is still the president of Venezuela after his 30-day window closed because his interim presidency doesn't currently exist, which makes perfectly no sense at all, and because he has no power. By those standards, as she puts it, which I always love her humorous aspect to this, she says, by those standards, I'm just as much president of Venezuela as Guaido is. Where's my meeting with Mike Pence? Right? Because I'm not in charge of anything and I have no power, so why am I not the Venezuelan president? It's ridiculous that what they're trying to push. The only thing that makes him the so-called interim president is because the U.S. says so. That's it. But of course, facts don't figure into this equation at all, because this is a coup by narrative, as she points out. Thank you, LeBron, for the super chat. Narrative always takes precedent over fact in these games. They will keep referring to Juan the guy as President Guaido, despite the admitted fact that he does not actually have any of the powers or recognition that an actual president has. And despite the fact that there is currently a guy in Caracas who, does have all those things. They will keep advancing this narrative control war until it either succeeds or fails. And in the case of the latter, they'll change tactics and, try something else. And as I would point out, I think this is clearly where, historically speaking, we would see them shift into a military action. Preceded by some kind of a terrorist attack by Maduro on his own people, gassing his own people, or some kind of something of the like that we've seen repeatedly used and repeatedly proven to be false over and over around multiple locations of the world, Syria being a huge example. But I think that's what we will see coming if this continues to fail, and it's clearly failing, as even their own narrative is all over the place. Now, for the next story that is directly related to this, in regard to the same topic from Zero Hedge, entitled Venezuelan Opposition Seizes Diplomatic Properties in the U.S., Plans Embassy Takeover. This screams desperation to me. And you can really break this down. So we're talking about a location. This is the United States, mind you. the very clear supporter of Guaido. The U.S. government is overtly open about how much they support Guaido. So why is it even noteworthy that all of a sudden they make a big show about him seizing these embassies? Clearly they're okay handing them over because it's the U.S. It's on U.S. territory. Technically, embassies are considered the territory of the location. They'd be Venezuelan territory. So it's definitely worthy to talk about because this is a gross violation of international law. But it's funny, they're trying to, this is a PR stunt, like all of them have been, to give these over in a massive show to say, look, oh, everything's shifting in favor of Guaido, even though it's clearly an effort by them yet again to try to sway your opinion, the narrative. Now, in its latest act of desperation, in this failing Venezuelan coup, Washington now has allowed Venezuela's pro-Guaido opposition to take control of diplomatic U.S. properties. You know, seizing these properties, as it's being phrased. Now, Reuters reported this week, that opposition representatives are now in control of 3 such Venezuelan diplomatic properties in the United States, as if that means anything other than that the U.S. is supporting Guaido. Now, these 2 buildings belonging to Venezuela's defense ministry in Washington and 1 consular building in New York. This is confirmed by Guaido's U.S. envoy on Monday, and they are apparently planning to take control of the embassy itself in Washington, quote, in the days to come. More coming as we all shift in favor of Guaido is what they want you to be hearing here. And it says, quote, we are taking these steps in order to preserve the assets of the Venezuelans here in this country. This is according to the envoy speaking with the Office of Venezuela's military attaché to Washington, which is humorous to me that they phrase it like this is somehow a benefit to the Venezuelan people, even though everything Guaido is about selling out the Venezuelan interest to privatization and foreign, specifically U.S. interests. But where this gets even more humorous is, according to Reuters, the opposition's first act, of course not public, not PR at all, was to remove Maduro's portraits from the buildings and replace them with Guaido images, photographs of which were then circulated among Western media, of course, right? Because this is not embarrassing at all. This is not an aggressive effort to try to make something stick. Look at everything shifting. We're even changing the portraits. It's just embarrassing. This is a very, very see-through, transparent effort to make it seem like things are changing, and they're very clearly not. Of course, they tried this and failed with the Costa Rican embassy, as we covered in a past show, where they basically went in, they bribed somebody for the keys, mind you, which is all on record. They went in and pretended to take over the embassy, and even Costa Rica, who is passively supportive of Guaido, is like, yeah, look, this is not okay, because until you take power, Maduro is still the president, and this is a violation of international law. And they basically made them leave. It was a very embarrassing failure. It was a PR social media stunt, and this is why they shifted to saying, okay, well, let's take the ones in the U.S. because the U.S. can make this happen. Now, Venezuela's foreign ministry was quick, of course, to condemn the violation of international law, as they called it, as it is, regarding these buildings, urging U.S. authorities to, quote, take the necessary measures to immediately reverse this forcible occupation of its diplomatic offices, which, legally speaking, is 100% accurate. Regardless of who they want to say is president, legally speaking, as Maduro is still in power and they have not declared new elections in their 30-day window, as we pointed out, and as he tried to fumble around in the beginning, we talked about Abrams saying this, this means that they cannot take over these locations, but that's why the U.S. is doing this on U.S. territory. Now, Reuters reported that only a handful appear to have actually gone along with the takeover. Again, when you get into the nitty-gritty, the details, it's clear that they don't have massive public support. Of 55 staff members, only 12 of them decided to remain in the United States and support Guaido. This is kind of generally what we're seeing everywhere else. He gets a small faction, largely, I would argue, probably due to some kind of manipulation, some kind of pressure or bribery coming from that of the U.S. forces. That's my opinion. Certainly, who knows? But regardless, we're talking about a fraction of the large whole. So most people do not support the U.S. effort. That's U.S., that's worldwide, that's Venezuela, that's everywhere. Easy to prove. Now, meanwhile, Washington continues to seize Venezuelan assets, the largest of which are financially troubled Citgo refineries. And this is the important aspect here, all of which Vice President Mike Pence weeks ago expressly stated would be transferred to the Venezuelan opposition under Guaido, who, of course, as we've shown, has explicitly stated that he seeks to privatize the nation's oil effectively taking away the very help that the U.S. pretends to be seeking for the Venezuelans. Giving this to Guaido means giving most of it over to U.S. interests and private companies. And understand that all of the social programs that we have now verified, free housing, free health care, this all comes from the socialization of the nationalization, of the oil and these national interests. And the reality is the U.S. wants to take these away, and Guaido is 100% in support of that. So pretending that you're giving this money to the people is an utter lie. And even they will support this as they speak out about what they're going to be doing with it in the future. Now, additionally, there's a great video by The Gray Zone where Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil and Alfred de Zayas, which we've continued to point out, address the United Nations. And it's very much worth your time. I've included a link to the full video in the show notes, about an hour, I believe. But here's just a clip of UN expert Alfred de Zayas pointing out that we are all being lied to in regard to this entire story, swimming in an ocean of lies, as he puts it. And that's a great way to put it.
I worked for decades as a senior lawyer for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I was secretary of the UN Human Rights Committee. I was chief of the Department of Petitions, that is what you would call registrar for the Human Rights Committee, Committee Against Torture, Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I think that the two reports of the prior High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, were unprofessional. Just simply unprofessional, because they violated the most fundamental principles of methodology. The principle audiatur et altera pars, that you have to listen to all sides and you have to reflect the information you get from all sides and not that what you get from the political opposition. So that those two reports, unfortunately, are political pamphlets. And that is unworthy of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We are swimming in an ocean of lies. I must say, when I went to Venezuela, I expected to find a humanitarian crisis. I was predetermined to find a humanitarian crisis. I walked the streets, I spoke to people of all kinds, and that was not the case. That means I had been manipulated, I had been lied to, and I resent that.
Now, it's pretty strong to hear that coming from the very person, the very expert whose job it was to look into this information and to show you very clearly that what they're doing now is politicized, as everyone's pointing out outside of the mainstream lapdog media and the government officials trying to cover it. This is a very clear thing to see. And I really recommend you watch that full video, because what Max and Anya have to say before it they're just as profound. And they have information to back it up, video clips and documentation. This is the reality. And we're finally beginning to see, as the average person out there, that what the U.S. is saying about Venezuela is not just slightly incorrect. It is 100% fabricated. And the story on the ground is incredibly different. And if you actually choose to look into the information, it all begins to fall apart. And the agenda behind it is much more than just oil and gold, but that is a huge factor involved in this. And it's largely why they feel that they can just do it, because they can justify it for a national interest. Because of course, it's in the U.S. American national interest to destroy other countries for their profit. That seems to make sense. That aligns with what the U.S. sees themselves as, I'm sure. Now, moving on to actual crimes committed by U.S. allies being completely ignored while they lie about their adversaries. This coming from the anti-media in regard to, you guessed it, Israel. UN war crimes investigators urge Israel to stop killing unarmed protesters. I wonder if they would urge Syria or Venezuela or any other country the U.S. deems an enemy, or if they would actually just condemn them and justify military action. But when it's Israel, they just say, please, pretty please, Israel, can you stop killing people? This shows you the ridiculous nature of the United Nations, at least when it pertains to the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And of course, this gets very interesting when you understand that they just, both Mike Pompeo and John Bolton have threatened the ICC, the International Criminal Court, if they even dare to investigate the United States or any of its allies, of course, including Israel. That's the important fact. Now, this picture is a sad picture, the same one I used for the show today, of all these shoes of murdered children with a sign that says Palestinian Lives Matter. The reality is that it's very clear, undeniable, that Israel is killing a unprecedented amount of civilians unarmed for protesting. And such an action would be massively condemned and used for military action by the U.S. if it was any other country they deemed an enemy. This is something that needs more attention. And it's getting more attention, which is one of the reasons why I think this is an important story. But again, the overarching premise here is that the United Nations is, as I continue to say, a toothless tiger in regard to this kind of action. But it will still wake people up. It's important to spread. And then even more so to point out why nothing ultimately happened, showing you who's really in charge. But United Nations war crimes investigators just yesterday called on Israel to stop its snipers from using lethal force against protesters in Gaza Strip. Not maybe, or investigation shows possible, but killing innocent people. So we know they've killed innocent people, and they're just saying, hey, please, can you stop that? I mean, just think about the contrast there to any other country that the U.S. points out as an enemy. It's staggering. They should be held accountable. People should be going to prison for killing innocent people, but not if it's Israel. Now, the Commission of Inquiry said Israel should investigate the shooting. Of course, right off the bat, they're saying, please, Israel, stop doing this, but then go ahead and investigate yourself. Ridiculous. But they said Israel should investigate the shooting of more than 6,000 people, far beyond the criminal inquiries that Israel has announced into only 11 of those killings. Really doing their job. It says, quote, the most important thing for the government of Israel is to review the rules of engagement immediately, as if they don't know, and to ensure that the rules of engagement are according to accepted international law standards, right? So even covering the point that they're going to argue that their rules of engagement are different. Like, they know they're maneuvering and manipulating and lying in order to keep killing innocent people. This is according to the Commission's chairman, Santiago Canton, speaking on the Human Rights Council. This is nothing new, people. This has been going on for a very long time. And remember, they left the Human Rights Council because they're saying that they're attacking Israel for, crimes they've committed. But that's when it's Israel that's attacking them. Oh, you anti-Semitic bigot for attacking the government for killing people. Right? It's ridiculous. Now, Israel says the UN Council is biased, of course, and it boycotted the day-long debate. Anything that calls out Israel, it's because they're either racist, they're biased, and, it has nothing to do with the fact that they actually committed crimes, verifiably so. Now, Canton said Israel's Supreme Court should review the confidential rules governing lethal force after the panel found it had been, quote, in the majority of cases authorized unlawfully. So even in their investigation, they found that they broke the law, and that it was authorized, that they not just was like they accidentally broke the law, but people above them said, yes, go shoot that child, that they authorized unlawful shootings. I mean, this goes incredibly deep. They broke the law, they knowingly broke the law, and it's institutional. This is what they do. And still, all they're saying is, please, can you stop? And it says, quote, in a situation of crowd control, which is the way we see these demonstrations, it says, which is ridiculous. It's not in any way crowd control, but this is the quote. It says rubber bullets could have been used, which I do agree with. They could have been using any number of other things. But the point is, it's punitive. They want to punish these people for daring to protest. But see, the point is, Palestinians are willing to risk their lives to fight for their freedom. And they just figured they would scare them away by killing their friends, but they're coming back. And this is why it's getting so much attention, because of their courage. Now, this is coming from Canton, again, speaking with reporters. And it says, rather than, quote, high-velocity bullets and long-range sniper rifles that they are using, equipped with sophisticated optical aiming devices. So go figure. I wonder if they actually want to kill people when they're using special rifles with sophisticated optical aiming devices so they can hit them instead of rubber bullets, which is the point he's making. Obviously, they're trying to kill people. That is the entire point. Now, Canton said the independent experts were sending their confidential list of suspected perpetrators, so just the individuals firing the rifle instead of acknowledging they're being told to do so. But they say they gave this list to the United Nations Human Rights Chief, Michelle Bachelet. Thank you for the super chat. Again, I appreciate all of your support today. For forwarding the International Criminal Court. So again, they're giving them this list of people that they say they should be investigated to the International Criminal Court, which opened a preliminary examination of alleged Israel abuses in 2015. But again, remember that the United States has said if you dare to investigate Israel, remember, not because of things they didn't do, but just in general. So Israel can rightfully kill people under the U.S.'s statement, and you're not allowed to investigate them because they're a U.S. ally. That's all they're saying. They give it this vague air of because it's illegitimate, but they're not saying that. They're saying you do not investigate Israel, bottom line, end of story. As regardless, people are still, I mean, the point is the international community has nowhere else to go. And they're beginning to push back against this overwhelming U.S. and Israeli force that's stopping their investigations. Now, earlier, a UN human rights investigator said Israel was depriving millions of Palestinians of access to regular clean water supplies, which is a complete and verifiable fact, and stripping the land of minerals in, quote, an apparent act of pillage. So this just goes on and on. So not only they're killing people, but now they're restricting their water and their food, and they're pillaging their land and stealing their resources. Does this sound familiar to anybody? This is exactly what's happening all over the world under a joint U.S.-Israeli foreign policy. Now, UN Special Rapporteur Michael Link said Israel, quote, continues full stream with settlement expansion. You know, settlement being a nice, pretty word for illegal occupation. And this is in the West Bank, which the United Nations and many countries deem illegal because it is illegal. You would think because of the United Nations deem something illegal, that would kind of be the understanding. But no. See, the U.S. and Israel seem to have the last word, and they only use the United Nations as a tool to effectively attack their adversaries. Now, there were 20,000 to 25,000 new settlements. We're seeing 20 to 25,000 new settlements a year, he said. Now, understand, we're talking about settlements where people are being kicked out of their homes, where bulldozers bulldozers are taking down these people's homes as they're being attacked, thrown to the ground, pregnant women. I mean, I've shown you these videos. And their houses are being taken. And this is not the first time they've been displaced. So they've been kicked out of their rightful territory. They found somewhere else to live. And now they're saying, well, now we want this territory too. Now you have to move too. Again and again and again. Stealing their resources, raping their families, killing their families. This is all on record, people. And this is why the United Nations is not saying, well, we maybe think we might have done this, but that you're killing people, so please stop. But you know what? It'd be great if they could say something a little bit more than just